So as we come into the second half of the course, we're going to be starting to think about how media are created. And then if you take 253 later, when we make podcasts, then you'll have a bit of a preparation in the ways that media industries work. For now, though, in this course, this is a media studies course, and it emphasizes critiquing the industries. So we're going to think about some of the problems that media industries have today, especially with the commodification of work. So we should know what is political economy, and we should know what it means to produce media rather than receive media and analyze media, so production being a different process from that. And we also should think about what problems and challenges media workers have as a group. So the people who make podcasts and movies and video games and the other types of media that we are familiar with. These industries have some special problems. So Karl Marx is famous for thinking that the economy of the world has a base and a superstructure. You often hear about Marx's base and superstructure argument. And for Marx, the base is the material conditions of the world, and the superstructure is the culture that results. Yes. Is there an interesting conversation to be had over at the ASUS computer here? You're watching a previous lecture from this very same course. Okay, speaking of media production.
She's talking to you.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're talking with me, or I'm talking at you twice at once.
Stalking.
Pardon me?
Stalking.
Stalking me on YouTube, yeah. I don't know why anybody would want to hear 2 times my voice at the same time. Sometimes 1 time the voice just puts people to sleep, so 2 times would be like an overdose. So for Marx, there's a base that's the economic condition, the material conditions. So for Marx, for example, when we produce a phone, the material conditions of the production of the phone involve vast amounts of the mining of minerals that require sort of scraping these minerals from across the surface of a huge amount of the earth. And we don't see that material part of the iPhone most of the time because the US government and the Canadian government don't like to have that type of environmental destruction around. So instead, a lot of that stuff gets sort of referred to China, where much of the collection of those minerals takes place. But it doesn't mean that iPhones don't require environmental destruction to produce them. It's just that that environmental destruction is hidden from many of the consumers that you see around you here. And then the cultural superstructure consists of the languages and interpretations that we give to our world around us, including the vast amount of information that flows through those phones. So I have my own favorite definition of production, and Marx has a slightly different definition of production. So I'll start with mine, and then you'll see how it connects with Marx's. So for me, production is the introduction of information from one system to another. And the reason that I use this way of thinking about production is that it harmonizes the type of production that happens in a legal world, like a court world. So if you are suing somebody, or somebody is suing you, or one company is suing another, there's a phase of the trial that's called production when people bring evidence to the court. Those things are the production of pieces of evidence to the court. And production there doesn't mean that you are creating the evidence. In fact, you shouldn't be creating evidence. That's a whole crime. Instead, it means you are bringing the evidence into that part of the world that is the court. So production means bringing some information into a system. And then Marx thought that production involves a sort of magic trick. And again, we'll come back around to Marx's full way of thinking about production in a moment. But for Karl Marx, the process disappears in the product. So again, if we go back to the iPhone, The iPhone has smooth curves. It is an organic sort of shape. It's almost as beautiful as like a flower or an animal that you would find out in the world. It looks like something that is almost healthy, or it looks a little bit like a stone that has been washed by the waves. The iPhone becomes a natural looking and feeling object. But the process that produces the iPhone is disappeared by the product that is the iPhone. And the same you can think of movie production. So the glamorous celebrities who look wonderful in a movie look different up close. They're still often quite glamorous looking people, but they're often wearing tons of makeup, and there's often a ton of equipment around them that's devoted to making that movie. The lighting is super important in a movie to make someone look beautiful. If you take a wonderful looking face and you light it from the wrong angle, the shadows obviously can introduce these shapes that people find ugly. So all of this lighting and makeup and other production apparatus is required to make a beautiful celebrity appear on the screen. And all of that stuff kind of disappears through the magic trick that is movie production, so that that celebrity's appearance seems natural in front of you. And you can almost imagine that if you met that celebrity on the street, they would be exactly like they are in the movies, as though they could walk out of the movie and be your magical super celebrity friend. So the process disappears in the product. There's a magical hiddenness. For workers, that magical hiddenness has some consequences. And over the years, as workers have developed more sophisticated communication systems, we have come up with terms for what happens when we work too much. And the terms crunch and grind come primarily from the video game industry and the software development industry. And crunch is what happens when you approach a deadline and you have more work to do than you can reasonably do given your state of health. So you might have 24 hours of work to do in 24 hours. Or you might have even more hours of work to do in that compressed time, and so you're sacrificing both the product and your own health to pull these all-nighters to get things done. Sometimes crunch happens to students too, as you've probably experienced. So if a deadline is approaching, you haven't written the paper yet, maybe that's because you had so many other deadlines to deal with. Maybe that's because you had too many papers due on the same day. And then you can get crunched when all of the deadlines pile up at the same time, and then you end up with a short period of time during which you're trying to push your body to accomplish as much as possible. When you saw me at the start of the semester walking around wearing a mask, it was because I decided I wanted to submit one too many essays. I wanted to submit 4 essays to journals in January. I set this extreme goal, and I met my goal, but I ended up staying up till 3 or 4 a.m. several nights in a row, and then I got the flu that was going around. So crunch has consequences for the health of our bodies. And grind is in some ways worse. So the term grind applies to situations where a group of workers is in a sustained state of crunch. So it's like being crunched, except the grind goes on for a long time. It's an unsustainable state to have your body in, but you are forced to do it to meet some sort of economic goal. And you can imagine, if you're working for a video game production company, you can imagine how angry the players become when a game comes out that has things broken about it. It has glitches. Famously, the game Cyberpunk 2077 had a huge amount of anger in the past few years from its players because they complained the game is broken, it has all of these glitches in it, and we can't play it as smoothly as we want. But that huge amount of anger had consequences and was really complaining about bad working conditions. So the anger ended up directed at the workers, but really the workers faced an impossible task to try and get that huge video game done in the small amount of time that they had. And in fact, before they released it, an extended time of grind preceded that as they tried to fix all of these errors, but they couldn't get to all of them. In movie production, it's not uncommon to have extreme long hours. So to make a movie, the celebrities who are involved with making a movie often sleep reasonably well during the making of the movie. So for example, if you are Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, you have a gym schedule that's built into your movie making, and you have an entourage of fancy chefs and so on. It's not just The Rock, it's a lot of other celebrities have this huge group of support workers who are devoted to making sure they are in good health. So they might sleep a good amount, but the generator operators and the lighting technicians and sometimes even the camera technicians and certainly the truck drivers and the caterers and the many other people who are involved in these huge 200, 300 person movie crews are not sleeping so well. So if you're one of those people, you might work 15, 16, 17, 18 hours in a day, several days in a row, and then you might have an hour drive on either side of that because you have to drive to all the places that they're using for sets. So movie business, including in Vancouver, is famous for having super long hours, and that makes the movie business not always as glamorous as it appears. It's still very exciting to work in that business, but everybody's bodies are pushed to extremes that are uncomfortable and destructive for people's health. Commodification is a term that Marxist theorists often use for things that become treated like they are goods to be chased after and purchased when they maybe shouldn't be treated that way. And we often speak about the commodification of work. And the commodification of work is what happens when you have to work so hard to get a job that the job itself, getting the job, becomes a goal. But the job is already something that you're supposed to do for somebody else. So we're all in this situation now where we have to chase after a job. We have to chase after the opportunity to make somebody else's life easier by doing a job for them. And that's the situation that you often hear from Marxist theorists as commodification. Not all jobs are equally commodified, though. And oftentimes in your economic life, you'll find that the best jobs to have are not yet completely commodified. So for example, a super glamorous job, you might think, would be to become an influencer. But everybody wants to become an influencer, be sponsored to live a glamorous life and so on. So because so many people compete to become an influencer, very few opportunities become available. And most of the people end up working for free, trying to be influencers and doing lots of free work for companies in the process. So that's what happens when a job becomes commodified to the extreme. However, if what you need to do is make money in a hurry, there is a way to do that. And at one point, for example, I joined a temp construction agency. I just walked in, the guy in front of me in the line had just gotten out of prison and he got a job. And then I stepped up and I also had my daily construction job that paid, I think it was about $120 a day. And it was a pain because I had to drive around to these different construction sites and some people were transiting around and we were often given jobs that nobody else wanted. So we had to sort through dumpsters of things, and it was not a super desirable job, but it was easy to get because it was not commodified. People were not clamoring to get this job, so when I walked in, I could just have it. Sometimes this is even true for higher paid white collar jobs if they are a little bit obscure or require a strange combination of qualifications. So if I give you a bit of Marxist career advice, if that's a thing that can exist, seek out the jobs that are not commodified yet. If you know there's a job that you can do that is in some way unattractive to other people, but you know that you can do it and might enjoy it, that's probably where you'll find the opportunities. I know that for a long time in the movie business and the businesses around it, people who had an advanced first aid qualification often got lots of work. If they had their occupational first aid 3, they often got work that way. There's a drawback to that because they have to deal with the ugliness of people being injured, so they have to be the people who are patching up those injuries, but because it's not a highly commodified job, the jobs were available. Meanwhile, if everybody is trying to be an influencer, the vectors of distribution for media become where the money is. So Google makes lots of money, and YouTube makes lots of money, even when people who upload YouTube videos don't. For example, my brother has a rock band that has about 2,000 monthly listeners or something like that. And there was a time when having that many people listen to your music was pretty good because you could sell them CDs directly, or you could sell them tapes, and you could make some money directly off of that. But nowadays, Spotify doesn't pay really anything for that. It would be, I think, less than $50 a year or something like that. It's a very tiny amount of money comes from Spotify for 2,000 listeners a month. And this is what you get when you have what the theorist Mackenzie Wark calls vectoral power, or vectoralization. So people who have been able to park themselves in the middle of the distribution process of a media industry are who are making the big bucks nowadays. So Netflix is making a lot of money because it distributes movies, not because it is artistic. Netflix is not involved with the art of making movies. It is involved with the vector through which a movie gets to you. So if you have a way to park yourself in the middle of the art process and the creative process in a capitalist economy, that is where the money has been going lately. The vectorialists for Wark are those who control the means of distribution of information. So now we come around to Marx's definition of what production is. So I defined production at the beginning of this lecture in terms of information, but if we go back to Marx defines production in terms of the harvesting of value. So for Marx, production happens when a certain amount of payment or wealth goes to a worker, and a larger amount of wealth goes to an owner of the means of production, to a capitalist. And then the difference between those two things is profit. And when profit happens, production happens. So for Marx, production is the production of profit. And what you'll find in analyzing the capitalist world is that in a capitalist system, those two things happen together. The production of information becomes attached to the production of profit. Not every system in the history of the world has worked this way. So famously for Marx, an earlier feudal economy existed that was worse. That was when monarchs ruled over the land and exploited people more. And then after the feudal system, Marx thought we would have the capitalist system that we have now. And then for Marx imagines that after that comes a socialist system, which is kind of this utopian idea where everybody gives according to their ability and receives according to their need. However, a lot needs to happen before we can achieve that type of society. And right now we have a society that is highly focused on the production of profit. A concern for the progressive left, if you find yourself with sort of leftist political orientation, is how to distribute instead of concentrate wealth. So a tendency has emerged through the Industrial Revolution and through world history where as wealth overall increases, life expectancies extend, living conditions improve, as that increases, also wealth inequality increases. So the quality of life improves for the richest people faster than it improves for the poorest people. And for people on the left of the sort of political spectrum, we want to somehow change that trend so that inequality doesn't constantly increase with the increase of wealth. Instead, people are thinking of how we might distribute wealth more so that we're not leaving behind members of our society. And that's when you find a discussion of social safety nets and taxes that take more from those who are making more and try and pay into our health systems and so on.